What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, August 7th, 2017, and we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. And we're going to start off here right at the top. A little bit of sad news. Ernst Zundel passed away of a heart attack in Germany on Saturday. And at least that's the official reason. And for those of you who've been following along the truth movement for a lot of years, Ernst Zundel was one of the major figures in questioning the historical accuracy of the proffered tale of World War II and Nazi atrocities. And he actually served time in jail for it. And I think one of the most notable moments happened when he was facing trial in Germany is the judge literally said from the bench, I don't care if what you're telling us is true, it is still illegal for you to say it. And he went to prison for a while and he was back out. And he was 78, so it's not entirely unreasonable that this was just natural causes. However, his wife, Ingrid, said she spoke to him just shortly before his body was found, and he sounded fine to her. Now, of course, heart attacks can occur with a tremendous amount of rapidity, so we don't really know. But probably all over Israel tonight, they're doing their dances and mazel tovs and dancing the hora and just having a real good time, because they don't like anybody who refuses to just believe as they are told to believe. Now then, getting on back to our domestic stuff here. Apparently, former San Francisco Mayor Willie Brown had a dinner meeting with two prominent members of the GOP, and he came back and said, it looks like the Republican foreign policy establishment, meaning the neocon war hawks, they want to see President Donald Trump impeached. His own party, the Republican Party, wants him out. He's not war hawkish enough for them. Even though he's gone completely back on his campaign promises to become friends with China, become friends with Russia, and he's out there sanctioning everybody, left, right, up, down. He's sanctioning the United States into complete isolation, but that's still not good enough for the war hawks. They want somebody who's going to have blood dripping from their fangs. That's why they wanted Hillary in there. Now, the Department of Justice, in response to a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit, has just released emails that former FBI Director James Comey claimed did not exist. And again, this is a story the corporate media is not covering, but the government released over 400 pages of emails related to that infamous private meeting between Bill Clinton and Loretta Lynch on the tarmac at the airport. And the emails show that the corporate media, we know, is not only corrupt and full of nothing but propaganda, but also colluded with the Democrats to ensure that this was the right type of reporting on this meeting. Oh, they just happened to meet by chance. They're talking about their kids and their families. It's amazing. And still the corporate media is out there, Russia, 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 Trump, Russia, Russia, Trump, Russia. Pay no attention to all the other corruption and crime you're seeing out there behind you. It's Russia, Trump, Russia, Trump, Russia, Trump. Repeat after me, Russia, Trump, Russia, Trump, Russia, Trump. Over and over and over again. And then they wonder why they're losing viewership here. Now, the new Chief of Staff, John Kelly, he's basically acting in accord with his background as a general. And he's basically called the White House aides together, where he basically laid down the law, how things are going to be working in the West Wing. No more leaks. No more hostility toward the president. You're either loyal to the president you work for, or you might as well tender your resignation now. And Kelly is also promising he's going to pull Donald Trump back from so much tweeting on account of Donald sometimes doesn't really think these things through before he hits that send button. Remember Kofevi? Good example there. Now, McMaster, National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster, is getting all this criticism from right-wing outlets. There's a lot of articles out there about, oh, he's an Obama holdover and he's this and he's that. Apparently his real crime is he supports the Iran deal and he sees Israel as an occupier in Palestine. Oh, we can't have that in the U.S. government. The U.S. government has to believe Israel owns that land. And so the AIPAC and all of the Israel firsters are literally declaring war on him, because they feel their iron grip on the White House beginning to slip away. Now, Donald Trump is a friend of Israel, is a friend of Netanyahu, but he's not fanatically so the way that Hillary Clinton would have been. And that's what all the brouhaha is about. And I got sent all these stories about how McMaster was this, and McMaster is working for Soros, and McMaster is doing this. It's the start of a media campaign to try and get him out and get somebody loyal to Israel back in as White House Chief of Staff. We're going to do a quick shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And interestingly enough, Maxine Waters has deteriorated to the point where everybody is taking notice. Dershowitz is out there basically saying she doesn't know what she's talking about. She gets up there and she flaps her gums and she makes a fool of herself. Why is she even in the Congress? Congress should be a meritocracy, not a corruptocracy. Jeb Bush has actually gone public. He wants Debbie Wasserman Schultz indicted. And yes, I'm in agreement with him. I'm absolutely in agreement with him. It is embarrassing, humiliating, infuriating to see the corporate media and the government just obsessing about Russia and Trump and just ignoring all this other evidence of criminal wrongdoing, even treason and espionage by the Democrats. And I'm not the only one who feels this way. Over at Breitbart, they have an article with so many red flags. Why isn't the IRS auditing the Clinton Foundation? We know their bookkeeping is a joke. Even the person that the foundation hired to come on in and try and clean up the mess couldn't make heads or tails of where the money had come from or where it all went, other than to confirm that only 5% of the foundation's money was actually spent on charitable operations. Now, under the rules of a 501c3, the Clinton Foundation is supposed to donate at least 51% of all revenues to their charitable activity. The IRS should yank their 501c3 status. I mean, look how the IRS was going after all these conservative groups and denying them 501c3 status and asking for all the extra paperwork. But the Clinton Foundation gets a free pass so far. But they ought to yank that 501c3. They clearly do not qualify, and that would make the Clintons personally liable for taxes on all of that money. It's a classic case of selective enforcement. We're only going after the enemies of the narcocracy, the friends of the narcocracy. Well, we can't go near them. You know, DNC actually stands for do not convict or do not charge. Rex Tillerson is still out there screaming that Russia meddled in the U.S. 2016 election. It damaged our ties and continues to be the justification for these sanctions being flung onto Russia. But as Trump's Election Integrity Commission and Judicial Watch continue to find, Russia had nothing to do with it. Now, New York, which had been denying access to their voter information, has had a change of heart. They're starting to cooperate with the Voting Integrity Commission. Judicial Watch was out there in California, and they got the voter records for 11 counties that had more registered voters than voting age citizens. And apparently in Los Angeles County, the number of registered voters in the county is 144% of the total number of resident citizens of Los Angeles County of voting age. Other places, still a problem. San Diego, 138%. San Francisco, 114%. It's all over the state. Far more people are registered to vote than actually live in those precincts. And I don't think it's just the presidential elections that we need to be looking at. According to an article out of Investment Watch blog, Congress has a 10% approval rating, and yet they're predicting 97% of the House of Representatives will be reelected to their seats next year. Based on, that's how many won their seats again in 2016. The two numbers don't line up. If Congress has a 10% approval rating, we would expect a much lower retention rate. I think the entire election system from top to bottom is completely compromised. And like I keep saying, I get all these emails from people who are living in Arizona who keep saying the same thing. I have no idea why John McCain keeps getting elected. Nobody I know ever votes for him. The system is a complete sham, and it needs to be torn out and rebuilt from the ground up. No more electronic election machines. Nobody voting without ID. It's amazing. You need ID to buy alcohol. You need ID to buy tobacco. You need ID to drive a car. But then all of a sudden, at the voting booth, somebody asks for your ID, and all of a sudden it's racist. Oh, it's racist to ask for an ID. The election fraud is clearly epic right now in this country, and we have to deal with it. We only have a little more than a year to really make some serious changes to the election system, or we, the people, will never regain control of our country. Meanwhile, tensions continue to ratchet up between the United States and Russia. Russia, of course, especially after the sanctions, is asking the U.S. to reduce their diplomatic mission by the 1st of next month. And Tillerson is out there saying, well, no, we want to continue cooperating with Russia. We don't want to cut off ties. You know, we want to keep our diplomatic people there, most of whom are probably intelligence officers. It really is kind of ridiculous. Now, let's get on over here to Seth Rich, because that story is not going to go away. We in the independent media are not going to let it go away. Now, as you know, one of the big issues here is that the police were supposed to be having body camera footage. They have body cameras. Police are required in many jurisdictions now to carry body cameras and have them running during all encounters to gather evidence, basically try and rein in some of this out-of-control police brutality. And the police officers who responded to the shooting of Seth Rich were wearing body cameras, and they were running. And apparently, when investigators wanted to see the tapes, apparently a Ms. Lyons said, well, no, they've already been deleted. We only keep them for 90 days. You know, you can't have them. Well, actually, the rules are very specific about retention. 90 days is the period you have to keep them if there is nothing on the tape of interest. But if it involves murder or manslaughter, you have to keep them for 65 years. In the case of first or second degree sexual assault, 15 years. All other sex offenses, 10 years. Death report or suicide, 10 years. These tapes never should have been thrown away. And the police department is lying when they say, oh, it's just a standard to get rid of these evidentiary tapes after 90 days. Remember when the BBC reported that World Trade Center 7 collapsed, and they reported it about 20 minutes before it actually happened. And BBC's official response to this discrepancy is, we have no idea what happened, really. And then people said, well, can we look at the raw video footage that was shot that day? And the BBC said, no, we just threw it out. Now, anybody who's ever worked in TV news knows that when you have raw footage of a history-making event, that is a gold mine. You do not throw that away because you're going to be able to license that and get royalties on it for future documentaries and programs about what happened years into the future. You never throw away something like that. BBC, yeah, we tossed it. Just, we don't know. It's one of those weird mysteries here. Apparently, somebody has detected there are now bot accounts on Twitter that are trying to push this idea, this story, that the Seth Rich murder has been debunked. It's nonsense, nothing there. It was just a robbery gone bad, and yeah, the robbers were stupid. They left behind his wallet and his watch and his cell phone and a bunch of other stuff, but that's what happened. And they're trying to basically flood Twitter with this story to shout down those who are asking, is this another addition to the Clinton dead bodies list? And certainly, I think it is here. Meanwhile, Google and YouTube are once again revising their ratings, rankings, search algorithms to target conspiracy theory. In other words, with this arbitrary definition of conspiracy theory, you will be lowered in your ratings and rankings or blocked entirely. And, of course, they don't need to justify. They just say, well, it's a conspiracy theory. We heard it on the corporate media. It's a conspiracy theory. Therefore, we're moving you out. Remember when John Podesta was responding to that whole thing about Seth Rich, and he said, oh, there's nothing there. It's a conspiracy theory. The mainstream media said it, and that settles the matter. That's their whole attitude right now. And that's why a lot of people are leaving Google and YouTube, and they're going over to Yandex and DuckDuckGo. Let's see. YouTube has just announced a new filtering scheme that will allow it to censor any videos about vaccines and their harmful consequences or the dangers of statin drugs. If you're going to be watching on YouTube, you will only see videos about how vaccines are wonderful and vaccines are good for you and statins are great. It's right out of George Orwell's 1984. Meanwhile, we have this story coming out of the Ron Paul Institute about how Attorney General Jeff Sessions is endorsing theft by his unbridled support for the continuance of civil asset forfeiture even against Americans who are not even charged with a crime. And, of course, at the same time, Sessions is at war on the First Amendment, cracking down on anybody in the government who leaks out embarrassing information to the media, like the CIA's drug running, for example. We're going to grab a phone call here. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. How you doing?
Doing fine.
Hey, what's up with this Hamilton 68 or whatever they're calling it, where anybody who looks up or checks out anything Russia is like looking up Russian propaganda or part of the, part of that conspiracy of Russia trying to get at us. It's like fascism. Like, this country's finished, Mike. I mean, the whole Western world.
I agree. There is no way to save it now. We're just going to have to we're going to have to kick back and just, enjoy the show as it continues tearing itself apart. But I mean, look how reckless the Washington Post was with their list of websites that were arms of Russian propaganda, which included my own website, for which I'm very proud, I might add. But all they did was they simply
collect. Too, Mike.
What?
I'm proud of your website too, Mike.
All right. Well, listen, we're going to have to take a commercial break. Do not hang up. I'm going to bring you back after these words from our sponsors. So we're going to take a breather here, have some more coffee, take a few deep breaths, calm down. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking with Dustin in New Jersey. And Dustin, please continue.
Mike, that commercial right there, We the People, it doesn't exist anymore. You realize that? It doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, looking at the scale of the election fraud, I mean, our elections are just a complete and total sham. Our election system is designed to facilitate and conceal massive election fraud. And it's clearly not just the presidential races. It goes all the way down to the House of Representatives, maybe even below that. I mean, the last couple of gubernatorial elections we've had here in Hawaii, there have been accusations of massive election fraud. And there's a lot of information to back it on up. But unfortunately, the way Hawaii's laws are written, your window to file an objection to an election result is only 2 weeks. It's not enough time to gather evidence. And again, it's set up to basically allow the elections to be stolen and make sure that whoever steals them is safe from being recalled.
Mike, how can anybody believe we the people anymore? Our jobs have been outsourced. We've been sold out.
Yes.
How can anybody not see we get sent off to war to die while they're sucking on martinis? We've been sold out down the river. They don't give an F about us, Mike. You know, it's to the point where I'm so aggravated at the lies. They lie to us every day, and there's a percentage of Americans that don't give a crap, Mike.
Well, you've got too many Americans who have fallen for this idea that if they just stay quiet and don't cause trouble, the government's going to give them stuff. The government's going to give them rent and health care and all the rest of that. And, of course, it's not going to happen. The government's running out of money. But there are people the government has pandered to, that segment of the population who are basically unmotivated and want to just kick on back and have a nice, easy lifestyle and have somebody else pay for it.
As long as they're told what to do, and if they don't do what they're told, they're going to get their paycheck taken away. That's what it comes down to. It's subservient, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, if you don't do as you're told, if you ask an embarrassing question, your career gets destroyed. Been there, done that. Didn't buy the T-shirt.
Well, thank God. I'm telling you, man. Like I love America, but thank God for Russia and China. Move away from the dollar as quick as you can. Buy gold. Stay safe, and thanks, Mike. All
right, thanks an awful lot, Justin. We're going to let you go here. I was just watching the banner on the Fox News, and apparently the Democrats are making a big deal over the fact that as Congress goes into its August recess, the GOP in Congress has accomplished pretty much nothing. And, of course, the Democrats have been fighting them tooth and nail, but the difference was these members of the GOP who just to block Donald Trump and make him look bad, voted with the Democrats on several key bills, including the repeal of Obamacare. And John McCain a year ago was excoriating the Democrats on what a disaster Obamacare really was. Then he votes to block the repeal, and that was the deciding vote. If he'd voted for the repeal, it would have carried. It was that close. And then afterwards, he's overheard saying, well, let's see Donald Trump make America great now. Ha, 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 ha. I think he's listening to that tumor a little too much. Apparently, over at Fox News, Eric Balling has been suspended over a sexual harassment claim. He's basically saying it's a witch hunt. And, yeah, it does seem like there's a pattern over at Fox News where the pro-Trump commentators are all being hit with these sexual harassment claims. And those who are openly opposed to Donald Trump, well, I guess they just behave better in the back room. Only possible explanation for that. Apparently, Salon.com is in serious trouble. They're struggling to pay their rent. Their landlord is demanding $700,000 for the unused portion of a 5-year lease. Apparently, they are in big, big trouble. Now, as you know, there are a lot of so-called fact-checking organizations all over the internet, like Snopes.com, and many of them have already been exposed as being gatekeepers. And with this campaign against so-called fake news in the independent media, there are more and more of these fact-checking organizations. But they're not all they seem to be. More when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about what amounts to a war between the established traditional corporate media and the independent media. with each pointing the finger at each other and saying they are the fake news, as Donald Trump has been doing to the corporate media. And the corporate media is saying, no, we're not the fake news. I mean, after all, just because we told you Saddam had nuclear weapons and humans are warming the earth and a bunch of stuff like that, and that, Hillary was going to win last year, there's no reason not to trust us. It's the independent media. And so they're trying to tarnish us as being the source of fake news. And there are some websites that have been set up that put out nonsense junk stories. And inevitably, the corporate media will always point at them as examples of why you shouldn't be reading any independent media. It's called poisoning the well. It's a very old propaganda tactic. The other tactic they're using are these so-called fact-checking organizations, which turn out to just be more of the same. And one example is the International Fact-Checking Network, which is out there fighting against fake news, primarily focusing their efforts on the independent media. And it turns out they are getting huge amounts of money from liberal sources, such as the Omidyar Network and, to nobody's surprise, George Soros Open Society Foundations. And so they're not really out there fact-checking. They're setting themselves up as fact-checkers in order to say, trust us, they're lying over there. They're lying over there when they ask whether Seth Rich was murdered. They're lying over there when they tell you that the BBC announced the collapse of Building 7 20 minutes before it happened. It's all lies, really. The corporate media has said it's all conspiracy theory, and that is the final word. So basically what they're trying to is they're dogpiling the propaganda. They're setting up all these different myriad little front groups so they can say, look, all these people are saying the official government story is true, and everybody else, how could they all possibly be wrong? And the answer is they're all getting paid by the same establishment here. All right, so let's get on to Donald Trump here, because a lot of people, and I'm one of them, are very unhappy over the sanctions against Russia, Iran, and North Korea, especially against Russia, because it is damaging our relationship with Russia, and it is based entirely on a lie that Russia tampered with last year's election. Nobody has any proof of it at all. The evidence all indicates that there was massive election fraud, but that it was internal. It was domestic, and it always favored Hillary Clinton. But that's become the new article of belief in the corporate media and the government. Russia tampered with the election. It's beyond questioning. Anybody who questions it will be burned at the stake as a heretic for not believing. And there's an article over here in SOT.net basically reporting on inside sources that the massive veto-proof yes vote in Congress on these sanctions was primarily engineered by AIPAC. Now, why would Israel want to harm relations between Russia and the United States? I'm sure they have a lot of reasons. But I wouldn't rule out the possibility that Israel is thinking somewhere down the road, if they can get a war going between the United States and Russia, and it goes nuclear, and the U.S. and Russia destroy each other, that would leave Israel with their nuclear weapons able to dominate the Middle East oil nations. And through that oil, pretty much control the rest of the world. When you look at Israel's history of false flags, deceptions, it's not impossible that they're thinking along these lines. Israel loves to set up fakes to send the U.S. off to war. That's what was behind the attack on the USS Liberty, along with the fact that the Liberty was intercepting evidence of Israeli war crimes. The real goal was that Israel wanted to sink the USS Liberty and frame Egypt for it, to bring the United States into the war on Israel's side against Egypt. And there actually was a strike in the air on the way to Egypt when the crew of the Liberty fashioned an improvised radio antenna and finally was able to get on out there, that they were being attacked by Israel. And at that point, the cover-up was put in place, overseen by Admiral John McCain, father of the senator from Arizona. Turning over to the war zones here, Syrian forces are making new gains in Raqqa amid the coalition bombardment, because the coalition is bombing things that are unconnected with ISIS and Al-Qaeda. They hit another hospital out there. The Syrian army has taken the very last town held by Islamic State in Homs, so that is a major, major victory. Now, interestingly enough, Henry Kissinger, former U.S. Secretary of State, had an article published by CapEx this week in which he said that the end of the Islamic State could give rise to an Iranian radical empire. So here we are in the situation where the U.S. created ISIS as a proxy. They're pretending to attack and destroy them. And here you have Henry Kissinger out there saying why they should be left alone, why they should not be destroyed, because there'll be an Iranian radical empire as a result. And I'd like to remind everybody once again, check your history books. Iran has not initiated a war of aggression against another country in over 200 years, and certainly not since the Iranian Revolution kicked out the U.S. puppet ruler, the Shah. Now, they did have to fight the Iran-Iraq war, but that was initiated by Iraq on behalf of the United States of America. Okay, we're going to take a phone call. Peter in Los Angeles, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, let me give you my opinion on the reason why. I have no doubt that Israel definitely wanted those sanctions. They definitely want a Cold War with the U.S. and Russia. The big reason is they can't accept the fact that Russia has stood in the way of their intervention into Syria, or getting us to intervene into Syria, and which means that will be the template from now on. People will follow that people know that they would be a reliable partner that can the Russians, that is, who can actually protect them from Israeli aggression. That it would make it hard for the Israelis with Russia being there undefeated to retain the Golan Heights, to drill off the coast of Lebanon, to invade Lebanon. It makes Israeli expansionism really, really tough to handle, and also puts pressure on them to declare their borders. Because then if anybody has to violate borders, there has to be a reason for a casus belli. So Israel has to do that. I mean, their whole agenda of unlimited expansion and domination is at extreme peril if they don't.
Well, I agree with you that is what a big part of what Israel is thinking, but I disagree with the idea that Israel wants a Cold War for two reasons. One, this war is already hot. When you look at all the conflict going on in all these countries all over the world right now. And second, a Cold War is not going to change Russia's relationship with these other countries where they're asking Russia to come on in and block Israeli aggression. The only way Israel stands to get Russia out of their way is if Russia is tied up in a really costly, bloody, hot war with the United States. And I think that's where Israel's pushing.
Mike, also, if you figure that if Israel benefited mightily from the Cold War, from the old Cold War, their narrative was the unsinkable aircraft carrier. Of course, there was no real treaty. They're not really an ally. But they got, $100 billion of largesse from the United States, with that, ridiculous, rationale that they were this unsinkable aircraft carrier, and the only, ridiculous as it seems, democracy in the Middle East and all that stuff. Well, they can reignite that, with a, continued, having Russia and the U.S. at odds, as well as their victory will be defined at what Israel can grab. But that's, I can't see it any differently than that, Mike. I don't know how else to look at it.
Okay. It's a good analysis. I just don't think Israel can accomplish it with a Cold War. I think they need it to go hot, and it's already hot enough.
Well, the way I see it, if the war gets hot and Israel actually is engaged, which of course they've always managed to let us do all their dying for them, but if they actually are engaged, they could lose big time.
Yes.
And I can't imagine them actually wanting a war other than they want the money that tensions bring, and they want the territorial fruits that the tensions also might bring. But they won't be able to expel people. They won't be able to move into Lebanon. They won't be able to do their overflying and bombing and murdering that they always have done with all their neighbors if Russia is the new reality.
Yes, I agree.
And you know what Dustin was saying earlier, Mike, about we the people, and you were talking about how nobody cares to look at the Democrats on this side. Nobody's even looking at all the law. The whole concept that the Supreme Court isn't even required to hear cases. It's always been set up that way, and he's absolutely right. There ain't no we the people in this at all, and even what we're talking about has been going on for years and years without any we the people in it at all.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And we just need to continue educating the American people that the U.S. government has broken the contract with us, which is that Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And we're seeing all these attacks on the Bill of Rights. They've already severely infringed the Second Amendment. Now you've got Sessions is declaring war on the First Amendment. Israel is declaring war on the First Amendment. They're out there already trying to make the case that, well, there are obvious exceptions to the Second Amendment, therefore we should have exceptions to the First Amendment, and they're trying to make it a felony to criticize Israel now.
Yeah, they say that 50 senators now are behind that.
Yes.
50 senators. But you know what, Mike, as I've called my congressmen and senators many times on this, I tell them that, listen, they're already taking money from us against my will, that they're giving all the billions of dollars that are both announced and unannounced about Israel. And now to not be able to say no to them about their products or that now that they're actually threatening our freedom of speech, we can't even talk about it.
Yeah. It's pretty bad. It is absolutely bad.
We have no say in this whatsoever. Whatever they do is okay. They get more billions. They control more. And then you see in the blogs, this will never work because this will go to the Supreme Court if this ridiculous law passes. But I want to point out that 4 of the 9 Supreme Court justices are Jewish. It could very well go.
Yeah.
And they're certainly bribable, the rest of them.
Or blackmailable. So, we already know they got something on Chief Justice Roberts because of his flip-flop on Obamacare. So they got his leash.
Exactly. Yeah, but I mean, you really expect Ruth Bader Ginsburg or David Breyer to vote against Israel? I mean, criticizing Israel? I mean, please. But at any rate, there you go. That's it for me, Mike. Thanks very much.
All right, thanks a lot, Peter. We're going to let you go here. And let's see. Getting on back to the news here. Now, the Russian vice speaker is urging the United Nations to look into the issue of the U.S.-led coalition strike on a hospital in Raqqa. The hospital was hit with 20 shells, and it was flattened. There were no terrorists in the hospital or around the hospital at the time. It was just destroying more infrastructure to prove that the U.S. is still butch and in control of the destruction, if nothing else here. So that's a war crime. Definitely a war crime. Now, over in Lebanon, this is where it gets really kind of weird and shows you that this is all driven by expediency. Because the United States, the Pentagon, is just now deploying U.S. Special Forces in Lebanon to support the Lebanese army in the upcoming campaign to clean out an ISIS border pocket in the country's northwest. The interesting fact is this necessitates some level of coordination with Hezbollah, which the U.S. has labeled a terrorist organization at the request of Israel. And now they're going to have to be working with them. Apparently, there's been a suicide attack on NATO troops in Afghanistan. 1 NATO soldier was killed, 5 others were injured, along with an interpreter, when a Taliban suicide bomber struck a patrol in Afghanistan. Obviously, it's actually 2 dead. But, yeah, they don't like us up there. 16 years. And we've had president after president after president saying we're going to end this thing. Remember, all the way back in 2008, Obama was campaigning on, if I'm elected president, I'm ending these wars and I'm bringing our kids home. But a lot of people are saying it really is time to bring an end to it. It's been 16 years. Over at UNS.com, they have an article, Time to End the Lost Afghan War. And they're basically going from a report that Trump has been lambasting his generals for starting these failures in Afghanistan, which is now holds dubious record of America's longest war. So, we're going to take a break here for commercials. When we come on back, more about Afghanistan. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about a growing chorus of voices saying it's time to get out of Afghanistan. The U.S. is in control of some areas, notably the pipeline right-of-way and the opium poppy fields. And that's it. And it really is time for the U.S. to get on out of there. They need an exit strategy. They're trying to figure out some way they can declare victory, or they can figure out a way to get Trump to commit to staying in there without admitting to him that the opium crop is a big part of the reason we're in Afghanistan, to supply the CIA with product. And apparently they've come up with one. Oh, the Russians are back in Afghanistan. They're secretly helping the Taliban. Remember, we reported on that article last week where they came out and said, oh, the Taliban are carrying these AK-47s, and that proves Russia's supplying them. So that's the new hue and cry. Russia's in Afghanistan. We've got to go back. We've got to kick them out again like we did before in Charlie Wilson's war. Now, the reality is the AK-47 is licensed for manufacture all over the world. So absent any markings that identify them as part of the Russian military, and those markings can, of course, be faked, there is no way of knowing where these AKs came from. But they want to stay in Afghanistan. They don't want to have to pay full price for that pipeline right-of-way, and the American drug lords don't want to give up that source of cheap opium. So that's the new hue and cry. Oh, we've got to stay in Afghanistan. It's the new battleground against Russia. Russia knows better than to go back into Afghanistan. And they're laughing at the U.S. for having walked into that trap in the first place. 16 years, America's longest war. And outside of keeping the pipeline right-of-way price down and shipping tons of opium to the U.S. and other places around the world, why are we even still there? In the graveyard of empires. We should just call it quits and declare victory. Nobody's going to argue against it. Yes, we've won. We're leaving. And the Afghanis will say, yeah, okay, sure, you won. Yeah, now get out. Apparently, Ukraine, Kiev, is sending foreign mercenary snipers against the Donbass. This is coming from the intelligence service of the Donetsk People's Republic, and they're reporting the arrival of a division of Ukrainian militants to the southwest of Donetsk and the arrival of these foreign snipers at the southern sector of the front. And according to the information they have, the enemy is, meaning Kiev, is carrying out the intensification of the units of the 92nd Mechanized Brigade southwest of Donetsk that had lost their combat capability. In other words, they're having to resupply and reinforce. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian army is resorting to firebombing on the Donetsk civilian village of Spartak. Couldn't take it over. They just hit it with incendiaries, burned it to the ground. We'll be right back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I'm just now getting word here. Apparently, one of the reasons that the Russians are complaining to the United Nations, apparently the U.S.-led coalition was using white phosphorus weapons over the city of Raqqa. That's a war crime, by the way. The only recognized use for white phosphorus is to generate a smoke screen if you're retreating. But it is absolutely banned for use over residential areas because it is an incendiary device. So, alrighty, getting on back to the news here. Down in Yemen, apparently the United States is not pleased with how long it's taking Saudi Arabia to basically tamp down the people of Yemen and get them used to living under puppet rule. So now U.S. forces are deploying into Yemen, into Hadramaut province, and more are probably on the way right now. And this is to get Al-Qaeda. We're going in to get ISIS and Al-Qaeda, really, honest. That's the only reason we're there. And the Pentagon is saying there are probably going to be a lot more. So now it's a direct military intervention into Yemen. This is not a Cold War. This is already a hot war. United Nations is out there saying that this war in Yemen has pushed the country to the edge of a cliff. They're calling it a man-made humanitarian catastrophe by Saudi Arabia, the blockade, and the head of the UN Development Program is saying nearly 7 million people in Yemen are at risk of starving to death, which is a particularly horrible way to go. Now, one thing that Yemen is starting to do, because of the blockade, is they're starting to produce more of their own weapons domestically. And they have now deployed what is called the Samud missile, and it's already been used against the Saudi-led troops in Yemen's Taiz district. And apparently it's turning out to be pretty effective as well. Meanwhile, a Saudi airstrike has killed 9 civilians in northern Yemen, most of them children. Saudi Arabia is refusing to say why the house was targeted, but there certainly weren't any combatants in it. Meanwhile, over in Saudi Arabia itself, Crown Prince bin Salman is taking a hard line with everybody in his kingdom who is not going to swear fealty to him. As you know, when there was that sudden swapping out of the crown princes, there were a lot of the tribal chieftains who said, wait a minute, we were not consulted, we had nothing to say with this, and we're not sure we want to go along with this. And apparently, Crown Prince bin Salman is starting to literally flatten cities and relocate the people, just destroy the community. And of course, you're not going to see that on the American corporate media, and you will hear no complaints about it up at the United Nations. Now, Turkey and Qatar are staging military drills as the Gulf diplomatic crisis continues. Escalates, in fact. So that whole area could just explode into open warfare at any point. And maybe that's the reason why the United States is now directly intervening in Yemen, so that Saudi Arabia can pull on out and focus on going after Qatar and Turkey. Following the establishment of the new UN sanctions, Iran and Russia are going to enhance their military ties, which means Iran is going to start getting some of these latest and greatest of Russian weapons, and they are very effective. We got to see that over Syria. And at least this article, which is in realiran.org, was honest enough to say that the sanctions on Russia are in response to Russia's alleged interference in the 2016 election. And that's a very honest way to say it's an allegation only. There is no proof. All the election fraud uncovered so far is domestic. That's why you've got so many states that are working to block Trump's Election Integrity Commission. They're literally out there saying, it's none of your business. You're not allowed to look in here. Senator Tom Cotton is out there ready to pin the blame for the decline in U.S.-Russian relations. It's all Putin's fault. Putin, he's behind all of this. You know, he's driven these relations to a low not seen in many years. And Cotton is out there saying Russia remains an adversary. Excuse me, Tom, but who is sanctioning whom right now? Who's carrying out all the bombings and drone strikes and regime change across the globe? It's not Russia. And polls are showing around the world that the citizens of planet Earth view the United States as the greatest threat to world peace right now. But, Tom, if you really feel that way, here's your rifle, and here's your parachute, and here's your day-glow orange jumpsuit left over from the CIA's torture centers. Just watch your head climbing into that transport plane, and we'll call Vladimir Putin and tell him you are on your way to kick his butt all by yourself. But we, the American people, are not going to be lied into yet another war of conquest to benefit the money junkies at the expense of life and limb of our children. We've been down this road way too many times. We have been lied to too many times. We're not going to go there. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. And there's an article over at nationalinterest.org that goes into the question of whether killing the Iran deal could actually trigger a regional war in the Middle East. And they start out with the fact that Trump, or at least those who are controlling him, are clearly itching for a fight with Iran, because after all, that's what Israel wants. Trump was ready to decertify the P5+1 deal until the IAEA came out and said, no, we just looked around. They're perfectly in compliance. Now we hear that October, which is the next time certification comes on up, that Trump and the White House staff are actively looking for anything they can point to as a violation and say, okay, the P5+1 deal is off, the sanctions are going back on. They want the war, they want the war, they want the war. And apparently in a July 25th interview with the Wall Street Journal, Trump literally prejudged the October outcome. He's literally telegraphing he's expecting Iran to be declared non-compliant. The war is on. Now, as you know, over in South Korea, the fact that they have allowed the U.S. to deploy THAAD missiles there has caused a great deal of trouble for South Korea and its government. China is definitely growing more and more hostile to South Korea over this issue. Poland has decided they do not really want to get involved in all of this. And so they have come on out saying that they are not going to allow the deployment of U.S. medium and short-range missiles on its territory for the foreseeable future. Now, I can imagine the U.S. is going to bring a tremendous amount of pressure to bear on the government. Because remember, South Korea's new president, Moon Jae-in, was saying the same thing. I don't want the missiles here, I want the U.S. out. And the U.S. is still in, and so are the missiles. But again, this is an indication that the rest of the world has just gotten fed up and tired with the U.S. government throwing their weight around. Now, a lot of people are scratching their head. Why did China and Russia agree to the new sanctions on North Korea? Well, Trump was threatening China with a major trade war. And I think that's the reason they went along with that. Russia went along with it possibly as a stalling action. And obviously both Russia and China do not want a U.S. war starting in that part of the world. So it's a delaying action. Now, the sanctions against North Korea ban exports of coal, iron, iron ore, lead, lead ore, and seafood. They prohibit all new joint ventures. They ban new investments in current ventures. And they prohibit North Koreans being allowed to go abroad for jobs. And, of course, they have restrictions on technology, supposedly to limit North Korea's ability to develop their missiles, forgetting that they got everything they needed from Bill Clinton long, long, long ago. Now, the sanctions are supposed to be fully in place by September 5th, which is 1 month after the sanctions were passed by the Congress. So, what is Kim Jong-un going to do? Well, he's already out there frothing at the mouth. But when the sanctions really start to take hold, the question becomes, how self-reliant is the North Korean economy? Can they produce enough food to feed their population? Well, obviously, if they're not allowed to export seafood anymore, there's one source that will be consumed domestically. But Kim Jong-un is going to want to hang on to power. And at some point when his population starts getting hungry, that may get to be very, very tense. And maybe that's part of the U.S. plan to bring about another regime change by starving the population of North Korea into overthrowing Kim Jong-un. The danger is that Kim Jong-un, when he's backed into a corner, he might do something very dramatic. Now, at this point, he doesn't actually have a nuclear warhead small enough to put on one of his rockets, but he still has the rockets, and he's got conventional warheads on them. And they can reach South Korea. They can reach Guam. They can reach Japan. At the point where Kim Jong-un feels he's going to be forced from power, what's going to stop him from just throwing the launch switch on all of them? This is a serious, serious gamble being taken by the U.S. government. And if you look at the track record of how often these gambles turn into disasters, it's not a pleasant thought. Now, to nobody's surprise, the fact that China went along with the sanctions against North Korea, Donald Trump has now put off the threatened trade war with China for now. That's the quid pro quo. It will come back. Because, again, the ultimate aim of all of this is to destroy the Chinese yuan and the Russian ruble and return the world to dependence on the U.S. Federal Reserve dollar. That's really what's behind a lot of this. Because our nation isn't a manufacturing superpower anymore. Nobody wants our GMO agriculture. Our entire economy right now is still being propped up by that portion of the world that is using U.S. dollars for trade and banking and paying interest to the Federal Reserve for the privilege, as it were. Now, North Korea is out there saying that the sanctions are a violation of their sovereignty, and they're rejecting any talks. Tillerson was out there saying, well, once we have confirmation that North Korea has dismantled all of its rockets, we'll talk. And North Korea is saying, no, we're not going to talk. And Kim Jong-un is out there with the threats, we'll turn the U.S. into a sea of fire, blah, 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 blah. Meanwhile, H.R. McMaster is out there saying that the U.S. is still prepared to launch a preventive war against North Korea. Maybe the sanctions are there to goad Kim Jong-un into launching a rocket against South Korea, at which point the U.S. has its excuse to just go back into Korea. And again, we didn't win the last Korean War, just like we didn't win Vietnam. That's not going to stop them from trying. We've been in Afghanistan 16 years. We haven't won there. And McMaster's is backing up this idea of a preventive war by saying the threat of a North Korean nuclear weapon strike is impossible to overstate. Yeah, the U.S. government overstates threats all the time. Saddam's nuclear weapons, Assad's sarin gas. We have the Russian foreign minister saying that, yes, North Korea is experimenting with nuclear devices, but they are years away from something small enough to go on the top of one of their rockets. And again, when North Korea gets nuclear weapons on those rockets, they are not going to just haul off and use them. Pat Buchanan, in his article the other day, had it right. The reason countries want a nuclear capability is so that they will not be invaded by other nations. And what the U.S. is trying to do around the world, whether it's North Korea or Iran, is take away their weapons of deterrence to make it easier to invade them. And these countries know that's exactly what's going on. Okay. Apparently, Israel has started an operation to shut down Al Jazeera in Israel. Israel's attitude now is only media that speaks glowingly and positively of Israel and Netanyahu will be allowed to operate inside the country. And so Israel's going to revoke the media credentials of Al Jazeera. TV journalists close the Jerusalem bureau and pull the Qatar-based station's broadcast from all cable and satellite providers. And so they've started that whole situation. Again, Israel does not have any respect for freedom of speech or freedom of the press. And that's why their continued tinkering with our country is of concern. So over at the original-antiwar.com, they're talking about these 50 senators who want to make it a felony to boycott Israel. And apparently the senators are citing as their justification a U.S. Supreme Court decision back in 1982. And basically the Mississippi Supreme Court had ruled that the NAACP, in declaring a boycott on the basis of racial discrimination, had caused financial harm to white-owned businesses, and they ordered the NAACP to pay for all their lost earnings. In 1982, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned that decision. But you can see they're pushing on this idea that boycotts should not be considered freedom of speech because it brings financial harm. Well, that's the whole point. That is the whole point. And around the world, boycotts have been a recognized peaceful form of protest. You're not going into the place of business and breaking it up. You're not going into the place of business at all. And they want to make it illegal to boycott Israel no matter what Israel does anywhere in the world, which doesn't obligate us to buy Israeli products. Simply to say, I don't like that product. And again, the classic case is batteries. When Claire and I lived on the other side of the island, we had this alarm system, and all the batteries in it came from an Israeli supplier. They were supposed to last 6 months. And they didn't. A couple of weeks. And the alarm system would start screaming that the batteries were failing, and I'd have to take it apart and put new batteries in. And they were very expensive batteries. And I'm not going to buy those batteries anymore because they're lousy batteries. That's all you need to say. I'm not buying that product. It's no good. It's a waste of money. It's poor quality. Now, down in Venezuela, it looks like there was an attempt at a regime change coming out of the military. And apparently military near the central city of Valencia tried to march on Venezuela's ruling body, the new legislative super body. And it's still being described as a power grab. You know, they're trying to get rid of a roadblock. Maduro has not been able to get anything through the National Assembly because the opposition is blocking him at every turn, just like the Democrats and certain Republicans are doing to Donald Trump. And already the big story all over the corporate media is how the GOP hasn't done anything in 200 days. All right, we're going to take and by the way, this military attempt at a coup was put down. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And in response to the quashed military coup in Venezuela, we're seeing where a lot of foreign companies, primarily in the oil industry, are starting to pull their workers out of Venezuela and tell them to come on home. So it's getting very, very tense down there. Meanwhile, I'm looking at this report, just came in from NBC News. The U.S. may begin airstrikes against ISIS, trust us, it's just against ISIS, in the Philippines. Boy, how quickly that situation deteriorated. All it took was Duterte saying, I'm going to get rid of the drug problem in this country. And Obama went down there and said, no, don't you do that. Don't you dare get tough on the drug trade. And now all of a sudden, ooh, ISIS is in the Philippines. We get to go bomb them. All right, getting on back here. Now, not too long ago, the U.S. Army bought some Chinese-made drones. And they were made by Chinese manufacturer SZ-DJI Technology Company. And they bought a lot of these units. They're very expensive. You got to pay for them. And then all of a sudden, the U.S. Army is saying, we can't use these. They have cyber vulnerabilities. And so Lieutenant General Joseph Anderson has ordered all service members to cease all use, uninstall all DJI applications, remove all batteries and storage media from the devices, and secure equipment for follow-on direction. And apparently the issue is with DJI. What do you mean they backdoored our systems? They can't do that. Only the United States is allowed to backdoor things that we sell to other countries. All right, Paul Krugman had come out with an article in the New York Times basically saying that the deregulation of banking is a mistake. And to nobody's surprise, he was immediately attacked by the Federal Reserve. It came on out and said, no, deregulate banking has just been downright boring since Glass-Steagall was repealed back in the 1990s. Wasn't all that boring around 2008, was it? So, the German economy is on edge. There has been a shock plunge in industrial output, the biggest fall in 6 months. And some of it's in factory and construction firms. That's 1.1%. But right now, Germany is taking a hit in their automotive sector, on which a large part of their economy depends. And there are two causes. One, people do not have money to buy cars. Sales are down. General Motors is sitting on a backlog inventory of over 1 million vehicles right now. They're literally hiring lots to store all the extra cars because they can't sell them. The other part of it, of course, are all these iconic German automobile manufacturers who were caught up in this emissions rigging scandal. And that's harmed their sales as well. Now, over in Great Britain, we're seeing a return to this tendency for people to cash out the equity in their home, to buy Bitcoin, invest in cars, and fine wine as something to store their value. I think they should go with gold and silver. Cars go in and out of fashion. Wine can turn to alcohol. Bitcoin, again, it looks good, but I question its stability. And, of course, if that prime rate goes up and these people are sitting on variable rate mortgages and they've cashed out their equity, then a rate increase is going to put them underwater. They will owe more on the house than it's actually worth. It's almost like some people just did not learn the lesson from 2008. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And getting on back to the economic news, one of the reasons why Trump may have backed off the China trade war, along with the fact that China went along with the sanctions against North Korea, was an evaluation of who would gain and who would lose, and more importantly, who would be most harmed by this. And that may be looking back at how the first sanctions against Russia actually caused a lot more harm to Europe, the United States, and South America than it did to Russia. How the poorly thought out oil price war, same result, more damage to Europe, the U.S., Canada. Now, one of the areas in which China dominates the world market is in what are called the rare earths. And it's a group of elements falling between 21 and 71 on the periodic table. They have become essential for manufacturing high-tech electronic devices. And China has vast deposits of easily mineable, easily refinable rare earths. And if they were to all of a sudden ban exports of them, it would have the same impact that we all felt back in 1973 when OPEC imposed an oil embargo on the United States for providing military aid to Israel during the Yom Kippur War. So that's a hammer that China has. We need to be aware of it. Now, I'm sure the U.S. government would say, well, you didn't really need an iPhone or an iPad or any of that stuff, but U.S. military development requires rare earth. This is the downside of globalism. You make everybody dependent on everybody else, then they can weaponize that against you. Looking over at the Bank of Japan, they're starting to sink into the same situation we have here in the United States. The math is against the perpetuation of the system. Their safety net is going to snap. The economy cannot sustain the government obligations that have been piled up over the last 70 years. Same thing here in the United States. The government keeps passing all these unfunded mandates, or it borrows money for whatever it's doing, and we can't sustain the debt anymore. Now, some U.S. companies are already starting to drool over the new sanctions against Russia, saying that it's an opportunity for them to start getting into these niche markets, such as Siemens, and start to get that. And that would be a good thing to start reviving American manufacturing. Okay, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Antonio in Chicago. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. There are so many different programs about UFOs now on TV. I was wondering your opinion on that one. Is that distraction, or do you believe that there's some truth on that one?
Well,
that's all I have, Mike.
My view is that the UFO craze, if you will, is a manufactured distraction to cover the development of black project aircraft. Because if you go back and you look at the history of TV shows and movies that were really pushing the UFO theme, you find they overlap the flight testing of various black project aircraft, like the F-117, various drones, and so forth. That being said, I'm absolutely convinced that the universe is full of intelligent life. I just can't think of a reason why they would bother visiting our planet. When you're driving down the highway in your car, do you stop and inspect every anthill that you pass? I mean, any civilization that has achieved interstellar spaceflight, they're not going to be interested in us. We have nothing that would hold their curiosity for more than a second. And it would cost them a lot of energy to slow down and look at our planet and then take off again. So at this point, I do see it as it's a distraction. And thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. Getting on back to the news here. Over in Silicon Valley, and we're seeing in so many places in California, real estate rental prices have gone through the roof, which is hard to understand because you have so many of the millennials who are living with their parents into their 30s now. And there's a new scandal that's come on out. This was over in Natural News, where apparently Facebook employees, people working for Facebook, are actually homeless and having to live out of their cars because they can't afford the high rental rates, along with repaying their student loans and their medical bills that fall below the deductibles of the Obamacare policies. This is an absolutely unacceptable situation for the American people to have to endure, where people who have jobs are still being homeless. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. Over in Chicago, somebody wasn't paying very close attention to their loan documents. The Chicago Public Schools are paying $850 million in interest on a $500 million loan. That's why you got to look at the rate of compounding and the rate of interest. The banks can make more money off of your loan than you got on that loan. Now, despite all the recent turmoil and interference and pressure coming from outside, the BRICS nations are getting their act together. And their trade ministers are concentrating on creating conditions for better cooperation amongst them. And this despite the China-India border standoff, the obvious U.S. economic warfare against Russia. Russia has responded to the sanctions by vowing to cut reliance on the dollar. And they're speeding up their work, reducing their dependence on U.S. payment systems. And that they're developing their own, BRICS is developing their own payment system in parallel. So, let's see. Molina Healthcare has lost $230 million, so they are exiting Obamacare. Obamacare has been a disaster for all involved, and it should have been repealed. And the only reason it wasn't was so that certain members of Congress could sort of give Donald Trump the finger. That's where their priorities were. That's what was important to them. Not helping the American people, but just scoring points. Now, apparently, according to an audit, Obama's Internal Revenue Service misled Obamacare customers. And apparently, they were part and parcel of this propaganda that signing up for Obamacare would be cheaper than it really was. And apparently, the Inspector General's report that came out last Thursday said the IRS dramatically understated the actual cost of enrolling. Apparently, the IRS said that most people could find health care plans for $75 a month or less once government subsidies were figured in. In point of fact, the average was twice that. Apparently, July was the worst month for U.S. car sales. Nobody has the money to power the consumer economy. Frankly, if I had any stocks in the stock market and I had stocks in the automakers, I'd be getting rid of them right now. They can't keep this up. I'm glad that they're keeping those manufacturing lines open and keeping those people employed. But if people can't start buying those cars, there's only so far they can take this. Now, over in Everett, Washington, there's a car repair business. and it's owned by a guy named Gary Watts. And apparently there is a homeless encampment across the street from his workplace. And so he installed a camera on top of his building, and he's now live streaming the homeless encampment on Facebook. He's planning on adding a high-def camera. It's going to be a 24-hour-a-day live streaming YouTube channel called Tweakerville USA. And, of course, tweaker is slang for methamphetamine addicts. So apparently there is a big drug problem in this homeless camp. So we have druggies who are homeless. We have employees of Facebook who are homeless. And by the way, that Facebook employee I was talking about, mother of two. But the rent got too high. Obamacare wouldn't cover her medical bills, and she's up to her neck in these student loans. And this is what she got for going to college, playing the game by the rules, and getting a good job at Facebook. She gets to live in her car. I think that's an absolute portrait of what's going on in this country right now. Apparently, the EU is going to pull 4.3 billion pounds from Turkey. At the same time, it's snatching cash from Great Britain to try and fill that Brexit hole. This resistance to the Brexit was all about money, because Great Britain and Germany have been carrying the financial burden for the EU. And if Britain succeeds in breaking free, that leaves just Germany. And Germany cannot carry that load all by themselves, especially as their country continues to be flooded with refugees. The EU chief is out there saying Germany is going to have to pay up to 9 billion pounds to make up for the shortfall from Great Britain. Merkel is not happy about that at all. Now, apparently up in Massachusetts, 4 state registry of motor vehicle clerks, along with 2 other people, have been arrested. Apparently, they were making false entries through the registry, false identifications, and selling them to illegal immigrants, some of whom had already been deported in the past. And then they were used to fraudulently register to vote in Boston, according to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Now, apparently out in California, ICE officers are being kicked out of labor offices in order to cover up the fact that there are illegal workers there. Now, apparently, migrants stormed a security checkpoint in Morocco and were able to just burst through. 180 reached European soil. So they're in, at least for the time being. The situation is getting so serious. Italy is now sending warships into Libyan waters to block any more refugees. They're going to stop those boats and turn them back. And if they refuse to turn back, they will be fired on. Now, the official story is that the Italian Navy is going to be assisting the Libyan authorities in arresting refugees. But this whole refugee crisis is tearing the EU apart. Now there's talk of a Bavarexit. Apparently 1/3 of Bavarians want to separate from the rest of Germany. This according to EU polls. And this isn't really anything new, because back in the 1980s, I was working on a film project in Munich, which is about as Bavarian as you can get. And even back then, there was this attitude that Bavaria wasn't really Germany. And there's a notable difference in the language in Bavaria versus the rest of Germany, which is High German. And so even back then, there was this idea, we're not really part of the rest of Germany. And, of course, back then, we still had the East and West Germany as well. So Germany was already fragmented back then. A lot of people are asking if California will secede and do a Cal exit. And it's entirely possible. A lot of places are now talking about that. And in the very near future, we're going to have Leon Siu, who's the foreign minister for the Kingdom of Hawaii. He's going to be coming on the show because they're keeping a very close watch on Calexit, on Catalonia, and all these other areas regarding what to do about the future of Hawaii. And we're not talking secession because it is the starting point of the Kingdom of Hawaii that the United States illegally annexed Hawaii, and the U.S. government actually admitted that during the Clinton administration. Congress passed, and then Bill Clinton signed an actual apology saying, yes, our grabbing of your islands was illegal under international law. We're not going to give it back, but we feel really bad about that. So the issue remains. Are we legally a state? More and more people are saying no. And it's time to start thinking about restoration of Hawaii's sovereignty and becoming an independent nation again. Now, getting on to the political correctness, and it just seems like every day it gets just a little bit more out there. And the latest thing, I mentioned it briefly last week, is along with white privilege, there's the new buzzword, cognitive privilege. And it's a privilege given to you by the circumstances of your birth, like your gender or your skin color, although obviously gender is now open to debate and fashion, being disconnected from biology. If you are an intelligent person, you have cognitive privilege, according to this op-ed, and that is just simply not fair. We have to do something to make the intelligent people as dull as the rest of the citizenry in order to be fair. Sounds dangerously like what was happening in Cambodia not too long ago. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're now finding out just how it is they're going to stay in Afghanistan. All of a sudden, ISIS has shown up there, and they're helping the Taliban against the good guys, meaning the United States. So that's going to be their excuse. Wherever the U.S. wants to start a war, oh, ISIS is there. There's ISIS. Gosh darn, they just keep showing up in all these countries we wanted to invade anyway. Now, getting on back to political correctness, interesting little article that came out of QZ.com, and it addresses the issue that we've seen in the media lately about co-ed military combat units. And, of course, the PC people are out there saying, well, yes, absolutely, women have a right and a duty and an obligation to be in the frontline combat units. And and now, of course, they're stretching that to include gays and transgenders and everybody else. But in this particular issue, the Marine Corps actually did an experiment. For one whole year, they formed a squad with 25% women, and they ran them through the exact same tasks as an all-male squad, and the results were pretty bleak. Basically, the all-male teams and crews outperformed the mixed-gender crews on 93 out of 134 tasks evaluated. All-male teams were universally faster in each tactical movement. Yeah, the guys are larger and stronger. That's the biology. And one of the big problems with liberalism and the snowflakes and PC-ness is the idea that we can disconnect from the biological reality. The shape of your genitals doesn't make you necessarily man or woman. You can choose for yourself. You know, the fact that you were born with a higher IQ, well, that's just not fair. It is getting silly out there about all this stuff. Now then, as you know, Gilad Atzmon is still out touring with his jazz band, and he is still facing tremendous resistance from Israel supporters who are threatening violence to get the venues to cancel, and it has been successful part way, but apparently there has now been a direct violent attack against the audience attending Gilad Atzmon's concert, and apparently they attacked the drummer as well, and he was injured in his eye, and apparently it bled for an hour, and this, I think, really shows you the nature of the supporters of Israel. They don't want a debate. They don't want freedom of speech. They don't want honest opinions. They're thugs. They're brown shirts, or in this case, blue shirts. You will do what they want you to do. You will think what they want you to think, or they will come on in and do physical harm to you. All right, we're coming up here on the top of the hour. And I'm going to start this story. We're going to take it through the break here. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And apparently the Dow has closed at a record high for the 9th straight time. Huzzah, huzzah, huzzah. Get out the pom-poms and the cheerleaders and everything. But experts are still warning that there is a correction somewhere in the future because the market is way overvalued, and they're not going to be able to sustain it. Now, obviously, in the current run-up, it is the military stocks, military contractors who are leading the way. People understand a world war is coming. They want to cash in on it here. Speaking of cashing in on war, this is a story that goes all the way back to Iraq and has to do with a means of disposing unused, unwanted ordnance called a burn pit. And there are big, giant burn pits out in the West that are used for some of this. And, of course, when you're operating in a foreign country, you will set up a burn pit to dispose of things that you find that aren't of any use and are potentially dangerous. And, unfortunately, U.S. veterans weren't really told that being stationed near the pits and breathing those fumes were going to basically harm them severely. And they have had major health problems from being stationed near the burn pits. And when you look at the open burning of munitions and waste as being as dangerous as it is, you'd think this would be a slam dunk for a lawsuit because these veterans have basically been ignored by the VA. You know, we're not responsible for this, go on out. Unfortunately, U.S. District Court Judge Roger Titus dismissed the veterans' lawsuit regarding the health problems and deaths, saying that there's no way to hold anybody accountable for it. And basically saying that the contractor who ran the burn pits didn't get to decide where the soldiers were going to be or where the pits were going to be. That was a military decision, and as well, it happened outside U.S. jurisdiction in the war zone in Iraq. Oh, well, I guess we're not going to see that. Now, as the feminists continue to come on back and scream about equality and wages and all the rest of it, I want to remind everybody that there was a phenomenon coming out of the militant feminists back in the 1990s, and it was basically the manufacturing of a rape hysteria. And it got to the point where you had people like Catherine Comans, the assistant dean of student activity at Vassar, was literally quoted in Time magazine, as saying a rape charge is a good thing for a man to go through. Now, in that context, she was talking about a false rape charge because the FBI supplemental crime statistics of the time showed that under the goading from TV talking show people and feminists, rape was the second most falsely reported crime at that time. And looking back at the statistics, we see there really wasn't an increase in rape. It was just another manufactured hysteria for political gain. And there's a very good book about it by Christine Hobbs Summers, who was herself a feminist, and was called Who Stole Feminism? And she documents how the original feminist movement, which was equal pay for equal work, equal access to education and credit, was a good thing, and we could all support it. And I did, by the way. but it got hijacked and mutated into this horrible male bash. Women need to be terrified, of all those evil rapists out there, off of which these hijackers made huge amounts of money with book deals and personal appearances. And so now that the feminists are coming on back again with a replay, we need to be very careful. Us guys need to be very careful that we're not going to get set up. And so in that context, there is a story regarding a student at the University of Southern California who was charged with rape, and he risks expulsion along with a jail sentence. Arman Premji was accused by an unnamed female USC student of raping her in her dorm room. And under California law, the victims remain unnamed. Now, the charges have been dropped against this male student because they found security camera footage from this Bandidos Taco and Tequila, where they had been hanging out together earlier that same night. And eventually, the two left Bandidos with a female friend of the accuser in tow. And the security camera footage clearly shows the girl coming on to Premji and making lewd gestures behind his back. And so basically the prosecutor said this idea that he got her drunk and took advantage of her is nonsense. She had morning after regrets. That's where a lot of the rape charges came from. You had a woman, you took her out for dinner, they had a really good time, and she gets in the mood, and then she gets up the next morning, oh, what did I do? I'm not that kind of girl. He must have raped me. And it just went out from there. So Premji has been cleared of all charges as of the end of last month, but USC is still doing their own investigation, and they could still kick him out. It's nonsense. Speaking of school and speaking of political correctness, speaking of snowflakes, this one's insane. This is coming out of the Gateway Pundit. And apparently there is this professor at this school, Dr. Richard Watson, and he is teaching business courses. And he's introduced a policy allowing students to choose their own grades in order to reduce their stress, in order to avoid the emotional reactions to stressful situations, which could have profound consequences for all involved. This is actually in the syllabus. And basically saying that when he grades the students, if the students feel unduly stressed by a grade, that they can email the instructor what grade they think is appropriate, and it will be changed with no explanation being required. Hey, I got an A. I know I didn't do the homework and I didn't study, but if you don't give me an A, I'm going to be stressed out. What's going to happen to these kids when they get out in the real world? This is just utter nonsense. And we think we're going to take these young people, put them in uniforms, and win a war against Russia and China? Planned Parenthood is still out there campaigning that your biological genitalia has absolutely nothing to do with whether you're a boy or a girl. Which, of course, is the direct opposite. When I was a kid, yeah, you got one of those, you're a boy. You got one of the others, you're a girl. This is part of this campaign to just turn the brains of all Americans into mush, to get us so confused we don't even know what bathroom we're supposed to be using. And Planned Parenthood is out there literally putting out guidelines for parents, instructing them how to talk to their preschool age children about gender identity. Tommy, you might not really be a boy. You have to wonder how many kids who had a good grasp of their gender are getting their heads screwed up by all this thing. Because if mommy and daddy are saying I might be a girl, wow, why would they say that if it weren't true? From the point of view of a little tiny child, mommy and daddy are functionally gods. And you have to wonder about how many of these young people who are not sure about their gender got that from outside. Apparently over in Great Britain, 800 children, more than 800 children, are already being given sex change drugs by the National Health Service. Some of the kids are as young as 10 years old. And they're getting hormonal injections to stop the onset of puberty and make sex change operations easier. It's wacko. It's a wacko world out there. Okay, let's talk about computers and stuff. A little bit of good news. A Wilmington businessman, this is being reported over in Oraz.com, a Wilmington businessman is facing an $82 million fine for making more than 21 million illegal spoofed robocalls. He got caught by the Federal Communications Commission. And basically what it is he was spoofing the caller ID so that you couldn't block him, put him in a block list, or you couldn't even track him back to see who it was. And that's illegal. One of the most annoying ones that I've been seeing here lately is the phone will ring and the displayed phone number is only a few digits away from my personal number to make it sound like this is a friend or a neighbor who's calling who's not yet in my contact list. And they got this guy, $82 million fine. Good. Because I got to tell you, I'm very angry at paying this cellular phone bill every month and having most of the calls being from scammers. It gets in the way of my calling my wife for absolutely no reason other than to say, hi. It's amazing. Story coming on out from Counterpunch. The decline of human intimacy in the age of mass surveillance. And basically what it's talking about is as more and more people become aware that there is no more privacy anywhere, it's inhibiting them. They're standing away. They don't want to be seen near somebody. They don't want to hold hands. They don't want to touch. They don't want to kiss in public anymore. And that carries through into your home. Gee, are they listening to us? Yeah, probably. They can. They have that capability. And maybe that's part of the plan, to keep us all emotionally, mentally isolated, and hence dependent on what's coming off of that view screen on the wall. Now, I'm sure you all know about Google Earth. I mean, I absolutely love it. I actually had a license when it was still known as Keyhole, before Google even bought it. And for anybody who is a student of geology or just wants to see the world, it's a wonderful, wonderful tool. A lot of people will look at it and realize that some photos are edited and blurred to protect certain secrets. And, of course, many of the photos are not up to date. They can actually be quite old, especially the Street View photos. But according to Blacklisted News, the police are getting a special version of Google Earth that has real-time capability. In other words, they can click on a location, and they will have made available to them any surveillance cameras that are in the area, so they can basically look at you in real time. Okay. We ran an article early today. This is from dancingastronaut.com. How to collect funds from Spotify's $43.5 million class action settlement. And this was a classic case of infringement. The class action lawsuit was brought against Spotify by Melissa Ferrick and David Lowery. And they have finally reached a settlement in which Spotify does not have to admit that they did something wrong. It was an honest mistake. And apparently what happened is Spotify was using copyrighted music without getting a license fee, without sharing royalties. And so they're getting ready to do a disbursement. Now, obviously, the lawyers are going to keep most of the money. And because Spotify did this to a lot of people, the final settlements probably won't be all that much. But we found out about this because in today's mail, Claire's laughing in the other room, we got no less than 9 of these cards, each with a different claimant ID and control number, saying that Claire was part of this class. Apparently Spotify felt Claire's music was good enough to steal, but not good enough to pay for. So Claire, on one hand, is very flattered, but she's also a little bit upset because she was hoping to make some money off of this music, and it is properly copywritten with the Library of Congress. We go through that paperwork rigmarole with everything original that she writes. So I'm a little annoyed because if I'd known it was on Spotify, I probably would have said, hey, go over to Spotify and you can hear Claire's music. All right, we're going to grab a phone call. Francis in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, aloha to you.
Aloha snack bar.
Depends on whether it's conventional or organic or what's in it. Anyway, bad joke there. You're talking about as far as the, let's see, the employment aspects and the education system and so forth earlier, or variation thereof.
Yes.
It's interesting you would mention about that earlier because I remember a time when back in the 90s, of course it's changed now, where you basically, if you put in for a workplace or whatever, you do electronically by email or fill out online or whatever, or on the computer screen or who knows what. I remember a time when you filled out an application that the person was either unable to fill out the application in whole, leaving major gaps, and their penmanship sucked.
Yes.
Because they apparently didn't bother to learn how to write properly. So it's no wonder that in the employment field of people actually going out and getting work at a usual shop at the mall or who knows where, that their employability really kind of varies. But then again, I guess it depends on who they know and how they got into the workplace anyway. But it's really gotten absurd.
Well, I want to do a comment here real quick on that. First of all, having lousy handwriting is not necessarily a question of not learning. When I was young, I was taught how to write cursive, and but I never use it. It's because of all the computerization, and as a result, my penmanship today is really lousy. And I prefer having a typewriter to fill out forms if they have to be filled out on paper instead of online. So that's one factor. Writing is actually on the decline in our schools. They're not even teaching cursive writing anymore, just block printing.
What?
The schools are not teaching cursive writing anymore, just individual letter after letter after letter. Capital J followed by lowercase o followed by lowercase b, so forth and so on.
How is that degraded? Anyway, oh, by the way, as far as the gender thing goes and who's getting what and given to who at whatever age, you know, I can see if the child's sex is ambiguous or they got both or whatever, but I'm sorry. If they haven't gone through puberty yet, how in the world are they supposed to know what their sex is except for what's between their legs?
Yeah, that's exactly it. This isn't trying to deal with people who've got a real problem. This is literally trying to brainwash the young into this agenda so that everybody who's slightly off the norm can feel comfortable and accepted.
Well, I look at it this way. Everybody, when they're growing up, before they ever get into adulthood, let alone go through puberty, you have that age of innocence, as it were, I guess you could call it, at least back as I remember it. Probably don't call that nowadays, but you went through an age of innocence where this thing about sex or gender, whatever, was non-relevant.
Yes.
You lived life. Now, that's not to say you didn't dress in the garmentry of what the sex was between your legs, but the moment you start going through puberty, if something was awkward going on, I mean, it's one thing to try to figure out what's going on here, but the body is changing on me, and I have no clue what's going on. Mom, Dad, what's going on here? Except for what talking to the teacher at school or whatever. But, I mean, a child is not going to know what their gender is as far as their, thing goes and all that until they hit puberty. And if they happen to have something fluky going on, then they better go see a doctor and see what's going on. Maybe something going on.
My concern is that these kids are actually being brainwashed to this confused state about their gender because they are starting so young, where these kids don't know. Anyway, Francis, got to let you go for a commercial break.
Have a great one.
Back with another phone call after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones here. Sam in Illinois. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What is on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Can you hear me okay?
I hear you just fine.
Wonderful. Comment to the last caller, just a quick comment. And then I have a question about Windows 7. I actually know millennials that cannot read cursive. So that is absolutely true, what they're doing to the kids nowadays. Anyway, regarding Windows 7, I have a do you know if I have a new PC that has Windows 10 pre-installed.
Mm-hmm.
If I formatted the hard drive and then reinstalled a fresh copy of Windows 7, do you know if the system would be stable?
Well, that's a hard question to answer because Microsoft has been working with the hardware makers to basically set up the BIOS so that you're only allowed to install certain operating systems. Now, some of the computers that are out there are still very vanilla in the BIOS, and you can put an older operating system on there, or you can put Linux. But a lot of the newer computers, you're literally locked into the Windows 10. And if you try and remove it and put something else on there, the BIOS is going to give you a headache. And what you need to do is do a search for your specific model computer and Windows 7, and include the word BIOS, B-I-O-S, which stands for the Basic Input Operating System, Input-Output System, rather. Okay?
All right, Mike. Thanks.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch to Glenn in Philadelphia. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I have a couple grammatical points and one political question.
Okay.
Actually, while it is true that you were one of the better-spoken talk show hosts on the radio,
mm-hmm.
I caught you in an error a little while ago that surprised me. And actually one just now. BIOS is Basic Internal Operating System.
Ah, okay.
But earlier you used the term copywritten, and it's not copywritten, it's copyrighted, because it's not copy W-R-I-T-E, it's copy R-I-G-H-T.
Oh, my goodness, I'm not perfect. What a shock.
I just thought, since we were talking about details like cursive writing and such, you might appreciate that.
Well, I don't think those gaffes on my part really are germane to the issue about whether people should be taught cursive writing or know how to read cursive writing. Again, under the influence of the computers, that sort of thing does seem to be going away. I know the tablets can still read cursive writing, but I think that implements like pencils and paper and everything are actually going to go away at some point.
Yeah, could be. I'll end up reading block letters and stuff. And my political question, you have been talking earlier in your show about Russia sanctions, niche markets, and you mentioned Siemens. I'm wondering, how do Russia sanctions have anything to do with artificial insemination?
No, I meant the Siemens Corporation that makes those digital controllers for manufacturing, okay?
Yeah.
I think...
Yeah, the German General Electric, yes, I know.
Yes.
All right, just having some fun, Mike. All right, take care.
All right. Yeah, and unfortunately, again, these sanctions are going to cause a lot of harm to European businesses, and they're already talking about punitive retaliatory sanctions. Thank you for the phone call, Glenn. We're going to let you go here. We're coming up here on another commercial break. And, okay, let's see. Engineers evaluating... apparently there's a huge sinkhole that's opened up down there in Florida. Of course, that happens an awful lot out there. There was a gentleman named Kevin Dunleavy, as an environmentally conscious roofing contractor, and he wanted to set up his own solar array, all well and good. And then he hit a roadblock. After building all of this, the local electric company wanted to charge him $45,000 to plug his house into the utility grid because of the solar panels. And their rationale was that the local wiring wasn't going to be able to handle the electricity coming from the solar array back into the utility grid. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and I'm getting a ton of email from computer enthusiasts basically correcting the gentleman who corrected me and saying that, yes, indeed, BIOS stands for Basic Input-Output System, and I'm looking at the Wikipedia page about BIOS, and yeah, that's what I thought it meant. So, all right, there we go on that one. Now, we were talking about the utility grid. Guy put up solar panels, and the local utility said, well, we're going to charge you $45,000 to hook those things in. Seems to be a pushback. Now, a lot of people have seen in the independent media lately a whole new revelation of Monsanto's dark operations, if you will, regarding protecting its flagship product, Roundup Weed Killer, which is based on the chemical glyphosate, which has been deemed a probable human carcinogen by the World Health Organization. Now, Monsanto is currently facing over 100 lawsuits in a federal district court in San Francisco brought by people who attribute their non-Hodgkin's lymphoma to exposure to glyphosate in Monsanto's Roundup Weed Killer. And as part of the discovery process, it submitted internal documents to the court that detailed the shenanigans in the company's internal science and its dealings with regulators and the press. And apparently the Monsanto lawyers forgot to ask the judge to seal this evidence, not allow it out, and now it's gone on out. And everybody is looking at all these documents. And so over here at Zero Hedge, we have another article. Documents released yesterday in the lawsuit against Monsanto have resulted in new questions about the company's efforts to influence the news media and scientific research, and revealed internal debate over the safety of its highest profile product, the weed killer Roundup. And the New York Times today said new internal emails reveal ethical objections from former employees to ghost writing research studies that were pawned off as independent analysis. So along with all of the lobbying, the buying out and taking over of science journals, which is how they suppressed that French study, we're now finding out that retired Monsanto workers were being hired to write research studies that were then passed off as coming from outside. That's pretty tacky. Pretty tacky indeed. Now, over at the Hanford nuclear waste site, as you know, they've been dealing with the deterioration of some of the infrastructure where this radioactive material is dumped or temporarily stored. And it's turned out that, yes, the workers at Hanford Nuclear have swallowed radiation particles. They test positive for contamination. And I want to underscore the difference between exposure to radiation and contamination. Exposure means something that's radioactive, you're near it for a few minutes, and you walk away. When you get a chest x-ray, that's an exposure. Contamination is when the radioactive emitting particles enter your body. You inhale them or you swallow them. And once they are in there, they are impossible to locate and remove. And they just sit in there radiating and radiating and radiating and radiating until sooner or later you get one of the radiation-associated illnesses, cancers, leukemia. So these Hanford nuclear workers were not being given adequate protection. Because after all, they're just workers. I mean, I remember in the aftermath of 9/11, when all the first responders were looking at all this asbestos with the towers. And the head of the EPA stood there and said, the air is perfectly safe. You don't need protective gear. Just go on in there and clean everything up. And all of those first responders are now dealing with serious illnesses, mesothelioma, for example. Okay, so Al Gore's new film, The Inconvenient Sequel, is now out. It is, as I mentioned last week, a box office bomb. It came in at a dismal 15th at the box office, despite all of the advertising and all of the rave reviews from the liberal media. Oh, you must see this. People just didn't. Fans of Al Gore are now claiming that Paramount Pictures sabotaged the documentary. I mean, again, we're seeing this classic liberal pattern. Don't accept responsibility for things that you did wrong. Find a scapegoat. In this case, Paramount. Now, getting back to the real world, Al, over this last weekend, it snowed in Colorado in August. Just a little light dusting, but it's an indicator. We're going to have an early, hard winter. And we're seeing these articles coming on out from like weather.com, where the forecast right now is for cooling temperatures in August, which is normally when temperatures tend to spike. And apparently lows of 60 Fahrenheit in Chicago, Green Bay on Friday. And these overnight lows are expected to persist in lands east of the Rockies for the next 2 weeks. It's actually getting cooler at night here in Hawaii. Now, during the day, the sun is out. It's almost overhead. So, yeah, it gets really warm here. But the nights are getting very, very cool. And yes, Claire and I have lived here long enough where we've acclimated to the tropical climate. But it is an issue here. And you've probably noticed over the last couple of weeks where the corporate media is out there talking about the extreme high temperatures all over the West, and they're just dealing with all of this. And you look at the actual map behind them, and the temperature is in the 90s, which is like normal for this time of year. They're still trying to sell this idea that the world is getting warmer, it's all your fault, to hit you with a carbon tax. And it's amazing. I have to admire their perseverance and dedication, because they've been on this since the 1990s. Almost 20 years they've been pushing this. No more winters, no more snow and ice. The ice caps are melting. Greenland's going to lose all of its ice. None of it happened. Al Gore bought himself a new home out, a beachfront home in California. Doesn't look like he thinks sea level is rising. Now, we all understand that climate does change. It always has. It always will. For the entire 4.5 billion year history of planet Earth, the environment is always changing. And we evolve along with that changing environment. I mean, if we were to teleport humans back to Earth as it was that first billion years, they would die. The environment was that hostile. But as the environment changes, as the oceans change, as the atmosphere changes, we slowly evolve to interact with the environment as it currently is. And sometimes I get really surprised at this species chauvinism when they're putting out these satellites and using these telescopes and saying, we're searching for planets where life can be found as we know it here. And you're cutting off a lot of opportunities. I think you're going to find life everywhere. And it doesn't have to be in conditions that are pleasant for humans. There could be life floating in the clouds of Jupiter. There could be something swimming in those methane pools on Titan. If you look at the extremophiles we have here on Earth, from fish that swim in the freezing waters of the Arctic to those deep crust microbes that are surviving at temperatures of hundreds of degrees, or the life forms that lurk around those deep ocean thermal vents, you come to understand The reason we are very comfortable on planet Earth is not because Earth was created perfectly for us, but because we evolved here to fit into the environment. And as the environment changes slowly in the future, we will change with it. And if we look at a world where conditions are hostile to human life, it doesn't mean that there won't be life of some kind there. All you really need is, the heavy elements that you find around population 1 stars, a fluid mixing medium, either liquid or gaseous, and a source of energy. And sooner or later, you're going to get that first self-replicating molecule, and that's the beginning right there. I think there's life all over this universe. I know there's indigenous life on Mars. Alrighty, let's see. Let's backtrack to some of the topics we were covering in other places. Poland apparently is going to accept migrants, but only from other areas of Europe. They're trying to find a balance that will get Brussels off their back, but Poland is still closing their borders to any migrants coming from the Middle East or Africa. They're willing to basically help balance the load inside Europe. Somebody's done another study basically saying that letting the illegal immigrants stay in the United States is going to cost 6 times more than it will cost to deport them. So it's a bad financial decision letting them stay here. Somebody posted a video, African migrants go wild after crossing border. Apparently, again, single, military-age male, virtually no women or children. A lot of people are very upset about that one. Down in Australia, there's a cafe that is very politically correct. And apparently they have decided on a 2-tier pricing structure. Men are going to be required to pay more for product service than women to balance out gender inequality. They're calling it the man tax. I have a feeling that that cafe is not going to do very well because the men are just going to go where they're paying the same price as the women are. Apparently, Bitcoin had another really good day, soaring to an all-time high. Everyone's saying, what's next? Well, we don't know. We don't know. I can't get away from this feeling of manipulation, of a gigantic pump and dump. I thought Bitcoin was cool, but I've had problems with it ever since the Bitcoin mining process turned out to actually be crypto breaking large blocks of public key data. Los Angeles has made $1.3 billion of welfare payouts to illegal immigrants over the last 2 years. $1.3 billion with a B, and every single penny of it a Title VIII violation. Now, we've been talking about the opium crisis in the United States. It's being supplied primarily from Afghanistan, both the legal and illegal opium. And again, we're finding out that the prescription pharmaceutical corporations who are selling the legal opium are encouraging doctors to get their patients hooked. And apparently a professor of surgery at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine in Baltimore is out there saying, yeah, he gave out opioids like candy. And apparently they're actually teaching in medical school, give every surgical patient a prescription for 30 to 90 opioid tablets upon discharge. Now, it's a funny thing about opium. If you are really in pain, the addictive qualities of opium are very, very weak because it's dealing with the pain. But if the pain has gone away on its own because of the natural healing process, and you still have 40 to 50 of those opium pills left, and you keep on taking them, you're going to get hooked. It's amazing. Let's see. Somebody put out a video about Monsanto attacking critics in the media over their products here. Another story here asking if Yellowstone erupted, what would be left? Not a heck of a lot. That's the reality. But again, despite all the talk about the quake swarms and everything, the indicators of an imminent super eruption are just simply not there. And if Claire and I were on the mainland, she's never been to Yellowstone, and I would not hesitate to take her there. Will it erupt eventually? Yeah. When? Could be another 10,000 years. Don't really know. Volcanoes are kind of funny that way. Apparently, Debbie Wasserman Schultz is under severe criticism for standing by her arrested IT staffer, Imran Awan. And she's out there saying that she did the right thing by not immediately firing him after he was caught sneaking around the House computer network and fired by other members of Congress. She did not fire him until the day he got arrested. And she's out there trying to defend her actions and say, I was being a loyal friend and so forth. I mean, how does Debbie Wasserman Schultz know that he wasn't stealing her secrets and making them available to her enemies? And the answer is, she doesn't. Or maybe she already knew that he had the goods on her, and that's why she kept him on the payroll. Very generous pay, too, for what was essentially a part-time job here. Apparently, over in Great Britain, they're passing some new privacy laws, which include a right to be forgotten from social media. And what that basically means is a lot of social media, like Facebook, for example, you can end your account, but everything you've uploaded there is still on their hard drives. Other people can search for it and find it and look for it. And the mechanism by which you're allowed to delete all of your own material is not user-friendly. One time I just wanted to delete a whole bunch of photos from my Facebook account because over time I built up a huge number of duplicates. And there's no way to simply say, delete all of this category. You've got to select by one, delete, select by one, delete, select by one, delete. And it's slow as all get out. All right, we're going to take a break. Back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I got an interesting email here from somebody who lives in the Ozark Mountains. And he's pointing out the oak acorns normally fall from the trees in late October and November. But in the last few days, this being August, the acorns are already falling from the trees. And that is another indicator. Now, you've probably all heard of the Old Farmer's Almanac or the original Farmer's Almanac. There's actually two of them out there now. But the original one that's been around since the 1800s has always had this amazingly accurate track record of long-range forecasting of weather of importance to farmers. And a lot of people have said, how did they get that kind of accuracy in an age before satellites and computers? And it was basically they would go on out into various parts of the country and they would look at the natural indicators. Was the heavy winter coat coming in on the squirrels and rabbits? Were the acorns falling early? And so forth. And they do have an amazingly accurate long-range record for accuracy. Okay, now, again, back to the media bias. You've probably been hearing all the media reports about this scorching hot Central European heat wave. Oh, it's horrible. It proves human-caused global warming. What they're not telling you is that at the same time and on the same data, Norway, Iceland, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, and North Africa are all below normal temperatures. Now, Wisconsin hasn't seen a temperature of 90 degrees or higher since August of 2013. Remember when Al Gore said the Arctic would be ice-free by 2014 or some such nonsensical thing? There is more ice now in the Arctic than back in 1971. So, again, the corporate media is desperate to prove that they're still in control of what you think, that they can tell you black is white, hot is cold, war is peace, ignorance is strength, freedom is slavery, and have you believe it. But again, especially those of you who are living in the northern latitudes, just keep looking out your window. Look at your own thermometer. There have been so many times that the official data is shown to be crooked, going all the way back to the ClimateGate leaks from the Hadley Climate Research Unit at the University of East Anglia. And despite that scandal, Hadley is still considered an authoritative source on the warming of the planet, even though they have consistently refused to share any of the raw data and methodology with other climatologists. There is no reproducibility, and without reproducibility, there's no scientific method. Human-caused global warming is not science. It's become a religion. And again, look at Al Gore's supporters looking at the terrible box office from his mockumentary. Oh, we were sabotaged by Paramount. It had to be sabotaged by Paramount. Everybody loves Al Gore and believes in global warming. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. I got to do the Jim Goddard show up there in Vancouver. We'll be back here tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Please stay tuned for John Stadmiller's program. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.